Hello, everybody, and thank you for attending our program for today, a forensic approach to Holocaust memory and education. I am Peter Lilienthal, president of the organization, and have followed in the footsteps of Alyssa Kaplan. She's done a phenomenal job. I want to say that we had some partners with this program, including the Federation of Jewish Philanthropy in Upper Fairfield, the JCC of Stanford, the UJA and JCC of Greenwich, the Holocaust and Human Rights Education Center of Westchester, and last but not least, United Jewish Federation of Stanford, New Canaan, and Darien that featured this program in their spring issue of the New Jewish Voice. Thank you very much, and I'm going to turn this over to our Vice President of Programming, Marcy Schoenfeld.
Hi, everyone. I'm honored to be the moderator of this program. But before I introduce Ryan, there is some housekeeping. Basically, everyone should be kept, you should mute yourself. And because of the time constraints, I'm thinking that you need to put your questions in chat or your comments in chat, and I will relay them to Ryan at various times. First and foremost, you must realize that Ryan is the son of Peter, our president. But what you might not know is Ryan also was a student of mine at Greenwich High School. So I'm very honored to be the one to introduce him. I asked him about what he wanted in his introduction, and this is what he wrote. As the grandson of Holocaust refugees, Ryan Lilienthal has devoted his professional life to the practice of law and creation of social justice network to advance immigrants' rights and the fundamental liberties that make the United States a refuge to those fleeing persecution. Ryan graduated from Tufts University with a degree in religion and received his law degree from Brooklyn Law School. A post-college internship at the Religious Action Center of Reformed Judaism launched his career framed by social action, which subsequently included work with the Anti-Defamation League of Connecticut and fellowships at the New York Association for New Americans and the American Civil Liberties Union Immigrants' Rights Project. Ryan has served on various boards over the years, including the ADL, an American Jewish Committee in New Jersey, and continues to serve on the advisory board of the Latin American Legal Defense and the Education Fund, an organization which he is a founding member. Ryan lives in Princeton, New Jersey. And with no further ado, Ryan Lilienthal.
I want to thank the Jewish Historical Society of Fairfield County and all the groups that are co-sponsoring this event. It's a real pleasure and honor for me to be speaking with you tonight. This program that I'm going to be sharing with you is an outgrowth of a conversation that I had with the executive director of the executive director of the New Jersey Commission on Holocaust and Genocide Education. He and I met, at some social event, and I told him about this letter finding experience that I had, and I'll talk about that shortly. And he invited me to put together a presentation for a professional development program for middle school and secondary teachers in New Jersey to show teachers how they can use primary source content material to teach the Holocaust, which is required in the state of New Jersey. So this program, while it includes content that is very important to me and to my family and is very meaningful for me to present to you tonight and anytime I present it, it's really a program about process. Looking at evidence, hence the word forensic. This is an evidence-centric program with a particular understanding that it could be used in the educational context, especially between teachers and students. But it can also be used by you. in the work that you're doing. And so I'm hoping that what you get out of this is the takeaway, is a feel for the resources that are out there, and an increasing accessibility thanks to the internet and the digitization of archives. And so the process I use to reconstruct what became of relatives of mine is a process that you can follow, and resources that you can look into to follow your nose and reconstruct the lives of individuals that may have been lost in your family. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by sharing my screen. I've got the sound share, and everyone can see that. So can everyone see this slide and it's coming up as a PowerPoint? Great. So this case study, and this is exactly how I presented this now 9 years ago to the audience of the New Jersey Commission on Holocaust and Genocide Education, is a case study that specifically looks at my grandmother's uncle, who she would often talk about. His name is Theodore Israel. And he came, or he had lived in what she described as this little village in the country in Germany. And he lived there with his wife and their daughter. And Theodore, Uncle Theo, was a combination of an older brother figure and a father figure for my grandmother. And so there you see my my grandparents, and this is on my mother's side. So the content of this relates to individuals on my mother's family, although recently I've been going through the process with family members, uncovering the history of relatives on my dad's side. But here's my grandmother and grandfather, and in the back you see Theo, kind of in that father figure role. So whenever I would visit my grandmother, she'd take out, or often when I visit her, she'd take out her stack of photographs that she kept in her dining room cabinet, and we'd share pictures of Theodore, of Minna, and of their boy Walter from this little village in the country, Elmshausen. And the story had always been that they were taken away in 1938 on Kristallnacht and never heard from again. And she always bemoaned the fact that they, while they didn't get out, they didn't send the boy, Walter, out. And so the way you can see this family is here, my grandparents, Reinhold Jablo and Mariana Wiener. They're related to Theodore, Minna, and Walter through my great-grandmother, Theodore's sister. And that's how the family tree stood until, as we understood it, until relatively recently. When I spent my junior year in Jerusalem, there was always an outside question in the family as whether Walter had survived the Holocaust, and we had never heard from him. And one of the things that we had heard about is that there might have been resources at Yad Vashem that we could go to see what happened. And sure enough, when I went to Yad Vashem while I was studying in Jerusalem, there were a series of large books that contained lists of victims of the Holocaust. And in one of those books, there was this list. And you can see on the list, here's Theodore Israel from Elmshausen. So I know this is in that little village in the country. And the list indicates, and I'm discovering this in 1990, that he's lost without a trace somewhere in Poland. And then a little bit farther down the list, also from Elmshausen, is Walter. And it indicates, and the page is cut off here, that he was murdered on July 10, 1942 in the Majdanek concentration camp. And in fact, because it was 1990, and this is the year when coincidentally, the year when the Berlin Wall came down, I was able to visit Majdanek, and while I was there, the archives gave me a letter confirmation that he was murdered on this date that you see on this list. And this is where things stood in terms of what we knew about my grandmother's uncle, aunt, and her cousin. And what was available at Yad Vashem, one of the resources that you can go to. You know, fast forward to 2007, and my wife and I were out at the movies in downtown Princeton, seeing The Counterfeiters, which was a commercially successful film featuring an aspect of the Holocaust. It was a Saturday night, and that evening, I got home, and the internet was already a thing. This is 17 years after visiting Yad Vashem, and I wonder if Yad Vashem has any archives that are digitized and might be available on the internet. So I got on the internet, and sure enough, Yad Vashem has digital archives, which you can look at too. And when I typed in the name Theodore Israel, this is what popped up. This page of testimony. And, you know, the name is Theo Israel. So is this Theodore? Well, it's listing Elmshausen. So I knew that this was a match. But what intrigued me was this form that indicated that he, that they didn't know, you know, what became of him, that he was taken away, you know, kind of consistent with what my grandmother said. The form was filled out by this woman, Elsie Rosal, which, you know, intriguingly, she described herself as Theodore's niece. You know, how could that be? My grandmother was Theodore's niece, you know, who is this woman? So it's the middle of the night on the weekend, Saturday night, and I go onto whitepages.com searching Ruzal. And I've got an address, Brooklyn, New York. There's no Ruzal in Brooklyn, New York, but there's a Hal Ruzal in Manhattan with a phone number. And so the following morning, I waited, you know, to the latest possible moment I could handle. I call this number for Hal Ruzal, and a woman picks up and asks, you know, is Hal Ruzal there? And she says, wait a minute. The next moment, Hal Ruzal is on the phone. And I'm telling Hal, you know, this is your crazy phone call for the day, but do you know who Elsie Ruzal is? And he says, yes, she's my mother. And 5 minutes later, I'm on the phone with Elsie Ruzal, who lived, and she died recently, in Riverdale. And we had a very long conversation. And one of the things that came out of the conversation was an instant expansion of the family tree. And so here you see the tree that I presented to you earlier with my grandparents, my great-grandmother, Theodore, Minna, Walter. And Elsie is related to Theodore and Minna in the mirror way that my grandmother is related to them, except that her aunt, Minna, married my grandmother's uncle, Theodore. And Elsie was explaining that her own niece, who's on the Zoom today, lived in a town neighboring my town, Princeton. And it turns out that the two of us had our kids looking at and enrolled in the same Hebrew school program. And so a very distant, unknown world became very close very quickly. And so Elsie explained that her father, Simon, and her brother Alfred and mother escaped Germany soon after Kristallnacht, or the year following, but right before, and I guess on the cusp of the beginning of World War II. I think they got out right at the beginning of September 1939. And so it was a traumatic event for all the family members. And I learned a little bit about her, and that was 2007. And that's where this story stood until my brother, who's on the Zoom also, introduced the next chapter. My brother lives up in Connecticut, asked me to be the caretaker of our grandfather's fabled stamp collection box, which he knew and I didn't know was stored in the the mudroom of our house for decades, like 40 years. And when our grandmother and mother died, he inherited the stamp collection and dropped it off. But the box, as far as I knew, had been unopened. And I had known about it, but I had not known the location. And so that evening, being the curious George that I am, I opened the box, and sure enough, there were thousands and thousands of stamps, much of it organized and much of it in complete disarray. But inside this box of stamps was a folder of letters, maybe 200 letters, almost all in German. And I started rifling through them, not speaking German myself, and certainly not able to read the handwriting, to see if there was anything that would catch my eye. And sure enough, stuff did start catching my eye, like the back of this envelope that was sent by my grandfather's brother, Arno Jablo, to my grandfather, with striking stamp figures that kind of suggested where the family's past had been, what landscape and what environment they had been in, and in a very tangible way. And so this was one document. But the item that really caught my eye was this. So I'm going to ask you to take a second and take a look at this. Using your detective forensic skills, what is it that you're seeing on here? And so maybe, Marcy, I'm going to pose the question to you, and we've been through this a little bit. Well, what's standing out for you, Marcy? I can't, Marcy, you got to unmute.
Well, it says the name of the town, the Elmshausen. So
Elmshausen.
So it's basically from your family, But
you're right, by the way. That's the very first thing that I noticed. Elmshausen.
And it actually went through a censor. So don't know why, but it went through an examiner too. So there's two different censorships, I guess, that went on.
Right. So you have all these markings. You have Elmshausen, which, okay, we have there's a connection here. This is the little village in the country. And then there are these, the tape and the pass by. What jumped out at me in particular, because remember my grandmother's story, Theodore, Minna, and Walter were taken away in 1938 on Kristallnacht and never heard from again. But the postmark is November 24, 1941. What's going on? This is not 1938. So there's an inconsistency here. And then there's the back of the envelope. Of course, the swastika jumps out in the stamps, but this, in English, opened, and in German, geöffnet, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, also meaning opened. Everybody's getting into this letter. Super examination. And, and I know we talked about this, but what else are you seeing on here, Marcy?
Well, the swastika stamp kind of thing, the Nazi stamps, stamping it.
I must say, this is a great pleasure, like reversing the role on the teacher. What else are you saying?
Well, I like the Deutschland kind of thing, but it looks like it was taped up, the X's, right? It was taped back together.
Right, there's all of that. And what's in addition to all that, so what's jumping out to me is the return address. There's the Elmshausen, but you have Theodore Israel's name. What's the deal with the double Israel? And I know we're going to get back to that, but this is something that was why did they do that? So this letter kind of launched a larger investigation. But let me share the letter with you. And keep in mind that given the postmark, November 24, 1941, this is a few months before the announcement of the final solution. But we know now that Nazi government had pivoted from its period of persecution, wanting to force the Jews out of Germany. They pivoted from that posture to a mode of extermination.
Peter, right. sorry, question was asked, and I have the same one. Do we know who that person is that it was sent to, this letter?
Oh, it was sent. There's Reinhold Jabla, my grandfather.
Oh, okay, okay.
Yep, good question. Thanks for jumping in. So we know that the date of this letter is after the decision to no longer force the Jews out of Germany, but to exterminate them. And this is, I'm using Saul Freelander's language from his books. But they don't know that. And so here's the letter. At least this is Theodore's portion of it. There it is, Elmshausen, November 23rd, 1941. Dear loved ones, I've received both of your registered letters as well as your telegram. You have likely also received my registered letter with the photocopy. Hopefully you've achieved your goal with this. I've sent your telegram in the community center and instructed them to wire back. As of now, I still have received no answer and don't know if this was successful. One day before Walter's birthday, I got mail from Simon, Elsie's father, and then his brother. Simon, and they write that all is well. The community center here says that nothing can be done. And you say from over there in America that there's also nothing that can be done. And so we must thus wait. From Alzenau, and this is where Elsie and her parents lived, Simon. From Alzenau, we recently received some mail, and it said that there supposedly had been several easings in Cuba. How to approach this problem, that's the big question. We are still healthy and hope to remain that way with God's help. With heartfelt greetings and kisses, especially for little J. With love for you all, your Teo. And that little J is my uncle. So, given this new information and this inconsistency, I kind of went on a tear to figure out what's going on. And of course, this introduces another type of information, the family information, the letters. But I got onto Google and started searching, these family names. And I searched Walter Israel, and this is what came up. And so it made reference to Walter and Majdanek. So I know, okay, this is the right history. And there's the date, July 10, 1942, when he was murdered in Majdanek. But then there's more information about Walter. A deportation from Mainz, Darmstadt to Piatsky in March, end of March 1942. Where are these places? And I decided to take all the information with the encouragement of my cousins to the U.S. Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. And I met with an archivist there. And all of the documents in these letters have all been donated now to the museum. And one of the things that the archivist quickly pointed out at the outset was Walter's birthday, November 9, 1925. And she noted that November 9 and November 10, this is the anniversary of Kristallnacht. And so not only is there a month and day coincidence, but that Walter, since he was born in 1925, would have turned 13 on Kristallnacht, November 9, 1938, 13 years later. And the immediate question that came to my mind was, and continues to be because there's not an answer, what became of Walter's bar mitzvah? And what kind of bar mitzvah was this? And so that's a framing for, or the backdrop for much of the research that unfolded from there. Now, the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum is not only an amazing museum, it's a tremendous research center, and they have an outstanding, they not only have outstanding archives themselves, now including the family, our documents, but they have access to digitized material and databases all over the world that isn't necessarily publicly available, from your home computer. Although since this time, more is. And by the way, this is all unfolding in 2012. And so I went, after I met with the archivist, I went down to the resource center, and I met one of their researchers was gracious enough to spend a little bit of time with me to search their databases and to see were there any matches to information that they might have. And so the researcher started looking around, and he came up with a number of documents, including this one. And you'll see on the side, there's a reference to the ITS, the International Tracing Service. So this is yet another resource that's out there, which is located in Bad Arolsen, Germany. And the Holocaust Museum has access to their files. And this is an index card that relates to Theodore Israel. And it indicates that he was released on December 2nd, 1938 from Buchenwald. So the archivist, the researcher explained to me that what this indicates is that Theodore, in fact, was arrested on Kristallnacht, November 9, 10, 11, 1938. And like 70,000 other Jewish men, was taken to one of two concentration camps. And the one that he was taken to was Buchenwald, and that he was released. I didn't know that people got released from concentration camp, but in 1938 they did. But they only got released on condition that they agree that they were going to leave Germany and leave all of their assets in the country. And the December 2nd date apparently is a release on the earlier side, and is an indication that he was probably a military veteran. And in fact, I've since found out that Theodore was a frontline soldier in World War I for Germany, and was injured in the war. So this is one document that we found through the International Tracing Service, but was accessed at the Holocaust Museum. When I got home, I sent a request to Buchenwald, because you can send requests to them too. Do you have anything on Theodore Israel? And sure enough, they sent me this document from their archives. And so this is the concentration camp. And they had this page. And if you look at this list, down at the bottom is Theodore Israel with his release date, December 2nd, 1938. But also on this list is Simon Oppenheimer, Minna's brother, Elsie's father. And what intrigued me about this is, Elsie indicated that her family fled Germany in 1939. What did she know about Kristallnacht? So I get home from the Holocaust Museum and give her a call, and she starts, indicating that on Kristallnacht she lived in Alzenau, which was, not too far away, but far enough away from Elmshausen, a larger town. And they owned a store. And when the people came and started breaking windows, and they heard about that, they knew to close their shutters, and they heard that they were arresting men. And so Elsie indicated that she and her brother and their parents fled to a village in the country. I asked Elsie, well, was that village in the country Elmshausen? And she said, yes. So I asked her, well, so you were there when Theodore was arrested? And she said, yes, I was there. And my father was arrested at the same time. And so here I am having a conversation with a woman who lived in Riverdale, who was present on Kristallnacht when Theodore and her father were arrested. One of the other documents at the Holocaust Museum that we were able to get was the deportation list. And so this is something that I now know is even, is more generally accessible, so that you don't necessarily have to go to the Holocaust Museum to get this. And so here's the deportation list from the end of March 1942, from Darmstadt and Mainz to Piatsky. And there on that list is Theodore, who has since become, this is March 1942. By March 1942, he has since become a gardener. He was a businessman. They of course lost their business, and they couldn't have a business for a number of years. And Minna and Walter from Elmshausen. And their street name had been changed to Nibelungenstrasse, after the famous legend of Siegfried that's, was at the time even, more popular by Richard Wagner's the Ring series. So they changed their name. They changed the name of the town there. But this is the deportation list. So to give you a sense of where all this is happening, this is a map of Germany as of August 1941, and the deportation happened in March of 1942. So Darmstadt is just south of Frankfurt, right around here, and they were deported from this area all the way across to the general government, which was Poland, to Piatski Lublin, which is right around here, and that's what that deportation reflects. The last document that I got at the Holocaust Museum that I'm going to share here is probably the most graphic of the whole presentation. And it's a bit jarring that this even exists. And this is another document held by the International Tracing Service, and it's the crematory ledger for the Majdanek concentration camp. And on this page of the ledger, which remarkably survived because we know that the Nazis destroyed lots of documents and material on their way out. At the very top of the list is Walter Israel. There's Elmshausen, his date of birth, November 9, 1925, and the date that he was murdered. This is the crematory ledger, July 10, 1942. So I get home with all of these documents, and I go back to the most helpful source one can have, which is Google, that I found in this researching. And I must have searched these names over and over again. And the internet is like the ocean, with like the water coming in and going out. And every time you do a search, over time you get a different order of results. And it just happened that this time, at the very top of the list, when I searched Theodore Israel, his name appears with a link to the Yad Vashem photo archives. And this was one of those, you like take a deep breath before hitting the link. And when I hit this link, this is what came up. So here's this photograph of Theodore. And again, I sent an email to Yad Vashem saying, what is this all about? And they said, you're asking the wrong people. You really need to go to the state archives of Hesse, the Hessian region of Germany, the Hessian state. And so I sent an email to them, to the state archives, the Hessian state archives. And within a day or two, I have this, Theodore's passport. One of the other archives that I had heard about, and it was reinforced to me as something that might be something to look into, was from a second letter that was sent to my grandfather. This one was typed and in English, where one of my grandfather's physician colleagues was urging my grandfather for help and suggesting that he reach out to a number of different agencies, including the American Jewish Joint Distribution Committee. And so for you researchers out there, this is another very valuable source of information. And I had recalled from my days soon out of college, working with a number of Jewish agencies, the Joint being one of them, that they had a names archive. And sure enough, they had one. And I typed in Theodore's name, and you hit the link, and up pops up more links with Theodore's name and my grandfather's name. And when you hit that link, this document pops up. So Marcy, I'm coming back to you.
Oh God,
because I think the audience, it's too big of an audience to ask the question to them, which I would do if I were in a classroom.
Right.
What do you see here?
Well, it's the thing that says it's closed. The document is closed. I'm not sure what that means. I can't read it there. Let me make it bigger. Oh, I see money. All right. If the money was deposited, and he
Yep.
got refunded. It was 920 something,
Yep.
or 980 was refunded. Don't know
Yep.
what money was given.
Yep.
And
So this is really, you're going right to the key piece of this, but just to kind of frame the document, here is, and you're looking at the money, here's a document that reflects that there were deposits made by my grandfather. And remember, it's his wife, my grandmother, who's the niece of Theodore, made by my grandfather for the passage of Theodore and Minna and Walter, who lived in Elmshausen. And we know that they were, the deposits were made in February 1941 and March 1941. We have a letter from them in November 1941, and we know that they were deported at the very end of March 1942, which makes particularly relevant the refund that they get a week later, a week after the deportation, on April 7, 1942. And while my grandparents, it's highly doubtful that they saw this document, it's highly likely that they experienced this information. And for me, it was putting myself in their shoes at this moment in time, and what that might have meant for them. So in addition to documents, and documents that you find with Jewish agencies, documents that you find with German state archives, documents that you find in your own home, there are also photographs. Now, I mentioned at the beginning that, periodically when I visit my grandmother, or often, she would bring out her stack of photographs, to talk about the old country. And sometime after 2012, when my brother dropped off the stamp collection box, my father dropped off that box that my grandmother used to take out, that had all the photographs in it. And so I opened it, and sure enough, the stack of pictures that that included the ones that I shared with you earlier, that was there. But what was also there was a teeny tiny album of photographs, small pictures. You couldn't make out what was in the pictures of, country pictures. And as you flip through it, there were a few pictures that depicted, something that showed a little bit more of an urban landscape with people. But it was so tiny, I couldn't tell what was going on. But I thought, I wonder, my grandmother never showed and shared this album. I wonder if this is Elmshausen. And I thought, if I could identify one of these pictures as Elmshausen, then I knew that the album was that little village in the country. And so I took this picture that you're looking at here because it had the most information with the buildings. And I went back to my favorite source, Google. And I started Googling photographs of Elmshausen. And after a 2-hour search, this picture shows up. So I lined up this picture with the one that was in my grandmother's teeny tiny album, and I started noticing things. That this door in the building way back matched the door in the building way back here. And that the 3 windows of this building, with the 2-1-2 pattern, matched the 2-1-2 pattern of this building. But the telltale sign for me that this was a match is that this triangle on the way back, this architectural feature on that building was a match for this architectural feature, so that I knew that because the image on the right was Elmshausen, that the image on the left was Elmshausen too. And by identifying that, I knew that another picture in that album showed my grandparents playing with Walter and Theodore roughhousing with Walter. And it was a window into their world that at one time was just a few names and the name of Elmshausen, the little village in the country. And this is where that initial PowerPoint ended. And this is the first part of the program. So hopefully you'll bear with me, and as I jump into the second part. Back to Walter's bar mitzvah, which as I said, continues to be a lingering question. I thought maybe there might be some documents in the archives, in the state archives, that might have shown that there was some type of, synagogue event. And I reached out to the archivist at the Hessian State Archives, who was so helpful with that passport, whether she had anything else. And what she sent me was a list of Jews that were still living in the area around Elmshausen, but she had nothing that related to a bar mitzvah. But I did have a list of names, and so I started Googling the names, sometimes individually, sometimes as a group, and this website appeared. This is the website for Lautertal, which is a consolidated municipality that included the consolidation of several villages. One of them was Elmshausen, the little village in the country, and another one was Reichenbach. And this page was a page about the Jewish community that had once been there. And so I sent an email to the contact, because there's a contact, this is who I am, this is the people who I'm looking at. And the next day I received this in response. Here we are, June 2012. Interestingly beginning, bonjour, dear Mr. Ryan Lilienthal. I've received an email from our chairman of the council. He told me that you were interested in your part of the family that lived in Lautertal Elmshausen, the family Israel. He informed me because I had an intensive investigation in the members of the Jewish community of Reichenbach. This is the village next to Elmshausen. For that reason, I have many information, especially about two families, the Leipsters and the Israels. And he talks about his own connection to the Israel family, his great uncle getting hand-me-downs. And then he gives me his phone number. And within minutes, I'm on the phone with Frank Maus, who's talking about the extensive file that they have about the Israel family in the local archives. So very quickly, I was buying tickets to go to Germany. And Frank, sure enough, brought me to the local archives. And here you can hear a little bit from Frank.
Well, let's just get started and see what we've got here.
Okay. Here we have a folder of documents just about the family Israel, former Oppenheimer in Elmshausen. All the information here inside is about this special family.
So Frank proceeded to, walk me through the numerous documents that were in this file, and I'm not going to do that to you tonight, but I wanted to share a couple of the documents with you, such as this one.
This is the asking of the family that they want the other names. Israel for the men and Sarah for the female.
So some of you might know that the Nazi government, in order to more clearly identify Jews, in addition to the yellow star that we all know about, they wanted to be able to easily identify Jews in documents. So they required all Jewish men to add the name Israel to their name, and all Jewish women to add the name Sarah. And so here you see what the mechanism is to make that happen. And it shows that the Nazis didn't just impose this requirement on Jews, they forced Jews to make the requests themselves. And the strictness of this requirement is reflected in my family's, their names. Their name was already Israel, and the men had to take the name Israel, which is why we saw earlier in that earlier document, Theodore Israel, the oddity of that, which stems from that request that the Israel family was required to make, as were all Jews, to take on the name Israel. So while I was visiting Germany, I also went to the Hessian State Archives. This is the place where I made that initial contact when that passport photo of Theodore came up. And while I was there, I was able to kind of have a tactile connection with with these lost relatives. And there you see me, the archivist. You're not allowed to take pictures in the archive, but the archivist indulged me and took a picture of me with Theodore's passport. But I wanted to do a little bit more, including record some of what was in the extensive file that was in the State Archive. And here's the cover page of the folder of the many applications the Israel family made to get out of Germany, including to get replacement passports. And so to capture some of this on film, I hid behind the copy machine to take this. And there's a still of that, of one of their passport applications with, the passport photos that we're all familiar with that we need to take when we get passports. Here's another document that was in that folder. So Marcy, I'm coming back to you. Representing the audience. What do you see? What do you see in this document?
I wish I spoke German.
So without speaking German, what do you notice?
Well, I noticed the Israel, and let's see. It talks about where they were born, 1925. I don't know. Is this a ship company or some kind of transit?
Maybe it is. I don't know. I haven't looked into that. So thank you for flagging that. I always learn something.
I don't know. I'm just because look. I have no idea. I don't know.
So
the Meister, I know he's the mayor of the town.
So
I know.
So notice the date, January 11, 1939. From the documents that we've seen already, we know that we have the letter from November 24th, 1938.
Right.
Excuse me. Excuse me. We know that Kristallnacht is November 1938. We know that Theodore on the index card is released December 2nd, 19.
I see something
Yeah.
Kinder children, and I see England. Okay. So this is the Kinder transport.
So remember my grandmother said, or asked, why didn't they at least send him out? Why didn't they, try to get him out? And so here's a document that is immediately after Kristallnacht. That's, a month after Theodore is released from Buchenwald. And they appear to be making a request for Walter, a Kinder Rausweis. Sounds like Kinder transport to me, somebody who doesn't speak German, going from Holland to England. Is this an application for the Kinder transport for Walter? So they were trying to get him out. And here's the back of that document. As an immigration lawyer, one of the things that I know is that when you make applications for visas to come to the United States, a file is made to include your application, and it's like your file, it's your A file. So I sent a request to the National Archives to see if they had any files on the Israel family, and sure enough, they had one on Walter. So here again, my grandmother, why didn't they at least send him out? Well, there, we just saw what appears to be an application for the Kinder transport.
Okay, Monica says that yes, it's Kinder transport, and it's Holland or England, either one.
Oh, so you're getting a chat. That's great. Oh, so if you could save that, I want to see it. That's great. And so maybe afterwards in the Q&A, I can learn more about that. This telegram from 1940 is sent by Honecker. Honecker was the consul general. This is the very top person at the consulate in Stuttgart who's writing a telegram on behalf of Walter to the Secretary of State in Washington, D.C. And he's indicating that Walter Israel, 14 years of age, registered with father Theodore Israel in July 1938. This is even before Kristallnacht. They're already trying to get out. That Theodore is under the Polish quota, and that number, the quota, has not reached them. They can't get a visa yet. If Walter immigrates by himself, he can be given an appointment under the German quota, because Elmshausen is in what I guess was considered German proper, and where Theodore was from, which is where my grandmother was from, which at the time was Germany when they were born, had since after World War I become Poland, and that's why they're getting assigned the Polish quota, at least from the U.S. perspective. That if Walter comes, he can be given an appointment, unlike his parents, under the German quota by reason of his birth in Germany, and as soon as his support alone is satisfactorily assured.
One
So
of the things
another,
at the bottom is that they should collect the money for this cable, $16.16. That sounds like a hell of a lot of money at this time.
it's really interesting. You can pick up information with every little detail on a document. So when you're looking at something, the type of attention that you're paying to it is the type of attention to pay. So good flag there. In the letters, in the letter from Walter, and the part that I didn't read from Minna, she indicates that she had news from Walter, and you don't know where he is. And so that was a question. So while they were in Elmshausen in November 1941, there was a question about where was Walter. So in the local archives that Frank showed me, there was a travel document. And this is an example of how Jews were able to travel from place to place outside of the town where they lived. This is a travel document that enabled Walter, a student, to travel to this place on Fischerfeldstrasse in Frankfurt. And so I took a copy of this document to the Jewish Museum in Frankfurt, yet another institution to find material. And the archivist there knew very quickly what this address was. He said, this is the Online Werkstatt. This is a place where there is a vocational school for Jewish youth to learn how to learn skills that they could bring with them to immigrate to places like Palestine or the United States. I went and I visited the site. The buildings have been, are no longer there. And when I returned from this trip, I was on a visit to the Museum of Jewish Heritage in New York City, going through one of their exhibits. And inside one of their showcases was a photo album, photographs of young people learning, skills like, ironwork and carpentry and so on. And when you read the label, it was from the Online Werkstatt in Frankfurt. And the Museum of Jewish Heritage had original photographs of that, which were digitized, which you can find online, and they include these photos. And because of that travel document, I know that while Theodore and Minna were in Elmshausen, where they wrote that letter from 1941, this is where Walter was. And I'm going through it quickly just to give you a flavor of that environment. And so Simone Oppenheimer, who's on this Zoom, who's Elsie's niece, has had many documents in her files, including this letter, which must have been sent to my grandparents because it makes reference to my Uncle Jay. But it was in her family file, which of course is interesting. And it's dated October 30th, 1941. So several weeks before that November 1941 letter. And here's part of the translation. My dearest, I registered your registered letter, and I think this is from Teo, and I'm sending you immediately a photocopy of our form certificate with hope of success. Our dear Minna was in Frankfurt and heard on this occasion that various people had sent telegrams to the aid via the aid organization to the relatives in America regarding, again, Cuba. At this meeting, she also sent one of those to you, which I think are my grandparents, which is already in your possession. The path is very expensive. Our Walter has been making lots of progress at his job, which is the online workshop, which is lots of fun for him. Who would have thought? He's already quite popular with his superiors, as Minna learned while visiting him. And that's the end of this part. And so with this search of documents, the construction of what this family life was like, and maybe not necessarily, it doesn't sound like it was necessarily all bad during that period, what that life was like. And this is the last part. And I'm returning again to the local archive, and here's Frank again.
That's the an order from the mayor to Theodor that the Landrat in the Kreis Bergstraße in the Kreis Heppenheim ordered him to tell Theodor, you are not allowed to leave your home at the time, starting at the time of 8:15 in the evening. He has to stay in the house, and it's the 17th of March 42. I think that's the last evening before the deportation.
Now we know that from the deportation list, which is from a deportation that started on March 20th, 1942, that the deportation process is happening somewhere in between this notice. And so we know on an exact moment in time, on an exact date, where Theodore and Minna are. And being, again, the immigration lawyer that I am, I know that, at least in the United States, you don't just deport somebody. There has to be some type of deportation order, a document that underpins the deportation. So again, I returned to the archivist in Darmstadt to see whether there was such a deportation order, whether they existed. And she sent me this. And I'll just pick up on parts of it. And as you can see at the end, it's dated March 18, 1942. So it's the next day. So this is a secret, geheim, this is a secret order, a deportation order of the Gestapo, State Secret Police, State Police, Service Post, Darmstadt. And this is the beginning. It is hereby stated that you must leave your home within 3 hours. For the purpose of the deportation, you and your family members will be temporarily detained and brought to a gathering camp. The assigned officials are obliged to remain in your home until you have packed your bags and have properly put your home in order. Further down, you may bring with you currency, 500 Reichmark. 2, a suit or backpack weighing less than 50 kilograms containing linens. B, articles of clothing. C, other items necessary for a simple lifestyle. 4, a complete outfit. And then in parentheses, you may dress in 2 jackets and double underclothing. Then you skip to the next page. Your luggage is to be labeled with a durable sign which contains your name, birthday and birthplace, address, and ID number in clear writing. You yourself must hang a sign around your neck on which shall be written in clearly legible writing your name, birthday, and ID number. You are to follow all orders of the officials unconditionally and without resistance. You are to provide all requested information. In case of non-compliance, you can count on the most severe measures at the disposal of the state police. And then you see the date, again, Darmstadt, March 18, 1942. And having visited there, other individuals showed me around Darmstadt, including a friend that I met who took me to the high school that was converted into the gathering camp. And so they vacated the high school for several days and filled, a number of the rooms with straw. And this is where they gathered Jews from the entire region around Darmstadt, including that little village in the country, Elmshausen. And they have a plaque on the high school commemorating or memorializing what had happened there. And there's a reference to the March 1942 deportation and the use of the building as a gathering camp. And the woman who took me to visit this also visited to visit the high school. And here's the inside of it. Looks like a high school. Introduced me to this gentleman who was born within several months of Walter. And he was a student at that high school. Was 16 years old, which is the age Walter was at the time of his deportation. And the students were told not to, don't go to the school, don't go near it. You're not allowed to see what's going on, but being the curious person that he was, he had to take a look. And here's what he had to say.
War das im März?
Bitte?
War das im März oder im September? Weißt du das?
Das war die erste.
Die erste.
Die erste.
So, at this place where we were and took the photos outside, it's the Landwehrstraße, and he saw a lot of people coming from direction of the Bahnhof, the train station, to the school, and he remembers the noise of the walking of the people, and he also remembers the noise of the SS and Gestapo who were the
Die hatten zum Teil genagelte
bewacht.
Stiefel, nicht? Das
With nails on the...
nails on the foot,
Stiefel.
so on the Stiefel, the boots.
The boots
had
with the
boots.
steel.
Yes, and you get a dark impression of the bodies and the people and the clothes dark, and it was not sunny, it was cloudy and a bit raining. So,
Okay.
any question?
Dankeschön.
So the people that he's describing, that event, was from the March deportation, and it was the gathering of the people, and what he would have been seeing would have included the group that was coming from the train station from where the Israel family would have also been traveling to that high school. This is the freight train stop. This is part of the train station in Darmstadt. It's not the passenger area. It's where they, would load cargo. And this is where the Jews were loaded onto trains. And here are the tracks. And in being there, just in terms of like aesthetically, I started to think about here's the departure of the Israel family. And I started to think about, where is it that they were headed to? Thanks to my brother-in-law, who's a comparative literature professor with a particular interest in Holocaust studies, he connected me with an archivist at the Majdanek State Museum, Robert Kowalik. And again, I was interested in what might have happened with the Israel family, and what was Piatsky all about, and this is what he describes. I can explain very easily what happened with Walter Israel. The transportation from Darmstadt, which was sent to Piatsky Ghetto, was stopped before in Lublin on the ramp on Flugplatz camp. This is the airfield camp. And there was a selection. Young men in the age between 14 and 45 years old were selected and taken to Majdanek. Rest of the transport sent at first on the railway to Twaniki, and from there the people were sent to Piatsky Ghetto. Such procedure was normal with many transports. It is very difficult to estimate if those people who were from Darmstadt were deported to Belzec or Sobibor. But in the case of Walter Israel, I can be sure that he had never been in Piatsky Ghetto, but only Majdanek. If he was with his family, was sent to Piatsky and later to Belzec or to Sobibor. I'm supposing that to Sobibor because they arrived to Piatsky a day after the second action, when people were deported yet to Belzec, and those were the individuals that were originally from Piatsky, and they were deported to make room for the individuals coming in from Western Europe. Next transports from Piatsky were only to Sobibor. Tomorrow I can check to tell you how many people were selected with Walter Israel. And so now we know that Walter was separated from his parents at the Flugplatz camp at Majdanek. And it happens that the Majdanek State Museum has different, some material around, but here is an aerial photograph from that time, from the airfield camp, which is where that selection occurred. There's information about the yellow border. These red marks indicate, among other things, the gas chamber. And here, again, to Google, this is Google Maps. I was curious to see how does that line up with today? And noticing the little yellow guy, I lined the two maps up to kind of like, okay, and here's, you know, where the gas chamber was. It seems to be approximately at this location, and I dropped the yellow guy down in that spot. And Marcy, I'm coming back to you. What do you notice about this photograph?
The high walls around it, but I don't see something in the back. I can't see what it says.
Oh, that's probably the Google water print. So this is the spot. This lines up to the spot where the gas chamber would have been. But what I'm noticing is the deterioration of the landscape, and in particular, this is where the railroad track would have come in. And you know.
Oh, you can see the remnants of the track.
You can see the remnants of where that would have been.
Mm-hmm.
And again, this is the kind of the detective mode. You know, what is it that you can find in the primary source material? Here's a photograph from the Majdanek State Museum. Maybe this was a photograph of one of those selections at the Flugplatz, the airfield camp. And here's a picture of what it looks like today. I won't read this whole piece to you, but there's a researcher who I met who's written about the deportation from Darmstadt, and she confirms that the majority of those who were deported from Darmstadt, if they had not died from hunger in the Piatsky camp, which had been cleared out before they arrived, of the Jews that had lived in Piatsky to make room for them, that they themselves were deported on June 22nd, 1942 to Sobibor. And around 200 deportees, among them, a few were from Darmstadt, were selected for forced labor in the Lublin district. Of those, thousands of Hessians, including the Israel family, from the March 1942 deportation, there were no survivors. The last document I'm going to show you from that local archive is this document. And it's, again, you can see it's stamped. There's the original stamped Geheim, secret. And it's directed to the mayor of Elmshausen regarding the evacuation. When you see evacuation, read the word deportation of Jews from Hessen, to the mayor of Elmshausen. And it's dated December 2nd, 1942. So by this date, all of the Jews that had been deported were already murdered, all of them. And so this is to the mayor from the Gestapo. As you were already orally informed on the occasion of the first evacuation of Jews, this is the one in March, occurring earlier on in this current year, all notations that could point to an evacuation should be avoided in the resident registries. On order of the Imperial Security Main Office, only neutral notations, such as emigrated, removed, moved away without designation, of destination, etc., should be used. Furthermore, it is advisable to enter in varied dates as the day of emigration migration in the resident registry pages, lest the fact of a common date of deregistration indicate an evacuation or deportation. I recommend that you give this your fullest attention. Marcy, what do you make of this?
Well, it's the final solution right here. They're going to their death. And it's sort of a threat that, oh, am I on? Oh, no, for a minute I thought I was muted. You know, and they're threatening the mayor too, if they don't do it. But I was surprised calling them Hessians, because I thought everywhere they just called Jews, 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 Jews. Hessians I would assume would be non-Jewish, but so you know, I don't know.
Yeah. So here, I think they are calling them Jews. They're just the Jews from the Hessian region. Of course, you know, as Americans, right? We think of, you know, the Battle of Trenton, which is where, you know, I live near there. The Hessians were in Princeton. You know, the ones who fought with the British. This is the same region, and the Jews. These are just Jews that live in that state. You know, to me, when I look at this, you know, this is after the deportations occurred. This is after all the Jews have already been murdered. So this is the implementation of the final solution. The Gestapo are telling the mayors, they're coercing, they're commandeering all of the officials to be part of this system, to hide the fact of what they did. So
Yeah.
they know what they've done is, you know, monumentally immoral, and they want to hide it. And Frank, for him, of all the documents in this file, this is the one that, you know, is the most disturbing. As a German, he says that. All right, why am sorry. Here we are. One of the things that had happened when we were in town, and Frankie was taking me to see these places, including, this is the building, that building in the background of those photographs. This woman just came out of nowhere. She must have heard that one of the descendants of the Israel family was there. She tracked us down, and she just started talking. And here's Frank translating for me on that visit in September 2012.
Is the battery low?
No, it's okay.
Okay.
So she's remembering going to the bakery
And Minna was inside the bakery, and she was talking with the woman who sells the bread. And the woman explained, Minna, it's not possible for me to give you bread because it's not allowed any longer. And they discussed with each other, and at the end, the woman told, okay, Minna, I will give you some more bread, but today is the last day I can do this.
So a question I have for the audience for our Q&A session, but to think about this, why did this woman come to say this? So in addition to like thinking about the documents, why is this happening? We didn't seek her out, she sought us out. Here's a photograph I have thanks to Simone Oppenheimer, the niece of Elsie and the granddaughter of Simon Oppenheimer, the brother of Minna, with a picture of Minna at their house in Elmshausen. And you know, one of the intriguing things and important things about this particular photo is about 15 years ago, the house was demolished. So it's not something that I got to see. But thanks to Frank, who, you know, had already been investigating the Israel family, and saw the demolition and drove by that property every single day on his way to work. He had the wherewithal to save a few of the bricks of the Israel family house. And so when I was there, one of the things that he gave to me was a brick from that house. In 2014, I returned to Lautertal and worked with this high school teacher that you see on the far right and her students. These are middle school students who, as they do every year in Lautertal, this consolidated community of villages, including Elmshausen, every year, there's not a single Jew. Every year they have a Kristallnacht commemoration where they do it culminates in the telling of a story. And all of these years, unbeknownst to us, the relatives of the Israel family, every year they tell the story of the Israel family. And they've been doing this for years. But this year, given that they then now had, which they didn't have before, pictures of the Israel family, thanks to pictures that we had and thanks to pictures that Simone had, put together a ceremony where during the course of telling the story, they pieced together the picture of the family that you see in the background, treating each part of the picture like a shard of broken glass and assembling it so that by the end, you had a completed picture. And there's the candle lighting ceremony. During that period, Frank and I had applied for the installation of Stolperstein. And here are the stones being installed by the sculptor. These are memorials that are placed throughout Europe in front of the sidewalks, in front of the properties where victims of the Holocaust once lived. And there are the stones. And since the house has been demolished, we decided to install the stones from the approximate location where my grandfather took that picture. And that is the end of the presentation.
Thank you so much, Ryan. Some people might have some questions. I think they could just ask it themselves at this point. Any questions?
Just as a general piece of information, Ryan, thank you very much for piecing all this together for all of us. Everyone needs to know that this presentation has been recorded and it can be viewed on our website and I'll send it around to all of you. I have your email addresses and you can get on and see the presentation. And obviously, as this whole mystery of the family that Ryan uncovered is a tribute to all of us, and especially to Ryan's grandparents and great-grandmother, who he loved very much. So
the amount of time and effort this took is just amazing to me. Considering, especially since you don't speak German, to get all this stuff is just unbelievable to me.
So there's the content, which is very meaningful, but I want to circle back to the process and encourage all of you to think about lives that you would want to reconstruct. And the reason why I title the program a forensic approach to Holocaust memory and education is that I think that because of the massive amount of material, documentation, photographs, oral testimony that is out there, not only do we know about the stories that survivors have been able to tell, and how lucky are we to be able to hear those stories firsthand, but thanks to them, we can use the testimony that they've given in combination with the increasingly accessible documentation that's been digitized to reconstruct the lives of the victims. So we can take the testimony of the survivors to help understand the story of the victims. And in that, we not only learn through primary source material, but we remember in a dynamic way.
Okay. And any other questions?
Can I just make a comment?
Sure.
I had from my father, who came from Hamburg. He came in December of 38 after Kristallnacht and left his mother and brother behind. And he left, they had sent him letters. There were 175 of them. And after he died, we took those and we had those translated. And the similarities between what you show and the letters that I have is, I think, universal for a lot. You don't know, they didn't know what happened to people. They just disappeared. He thought that his mother and brother were going to be sent to Theresienstadt. Well, his brother ended up going to Minsk in November 8th of 41. And his mother was gassed at Auschwitz as soon as she got there. And that was, we don't know exactly, that was in July of 42. And the thing about the censoring, while I can't know for sure that the letters were censored, there are numbers at the bottom that I have to wonder what they mean. And just the way things were worded, there was never anything explicitly said in the letters, but it was always hinted at. For instance, when my grandmother knew that they were never going to get out, she said, "I've done all that I can, and all I know is that the end won't be pretty." And how right she was.
Wow, yeah.
Yeah. And it's very, very difficult. As things get released more, it seems like it's very slow getting released because there's so much more that I want to find out, as I'm sure everyone who's on this journey wants to know. The information just isn't coming fast enough. Like, I would like to know if her name and the other relatives that went along were on Auschwitz. Was the list, where is the list for Auschwitz? You know, we don't know. They could have been destroyed, or maybe they're not released yet.
Right.
She was sent to a Jewish old age home, which was really, she was forced out of her apartment to live before she got deported. And his brother went to Berlin for work and also said how much he enjoyed it. But I have to wonder, did he really enjoy it? Or was that just a cover?
Right.
In
You know, it's
in Auschwitz I, there is a museum with the list of all the people who were actually put into Auschwitz and murdered in Birkenau. You can see it. It's much like the list from Yad Vashem and also from the Holocaust Museum in Washington.
Yeah.
You could actually take pictures. I took pictures of my family names in there.
Yes, I don't know though if that applies to those that were taken off and gassed immediately. If she
was, because one was a baby that I was named for.
okay. Okay.
I would you could do it tonight. You know, I go to the Yad Vashem website, and they have a few different types of search mechanisms. I would take a peek at that to see what's there. You know, that would probably be one of the first places I go to. The International Tracing Service has tons of information. And they, I think, recently have tried to make it more accessible. It wasn't so easy not that long ago to get information. You'd have to send a letter and then you'd get it mailed back to you. Now I think you can make an online request and get the information sent to you electronically. So those are a couple of like good places to go to get information. You know, yeah, and you know, of course, if you're ever down in Washington, the center they have there is, you know, outstanding for research.
I have one final question. Is there a cost to getting all those files that you get, or is that gratis?
I haven't been charged for anything.
Okay, that answers it.
And I also got some from Hamburg, and my mother was from Vienna, and they didn't charge for that either.
Okay.
But the you know, the particularly remarkable documents, of course, were the ones that are local. You know, who would have thought? And it was just by happenstance that came onto the radar, thanks to Frank. that there was this file that was held locally. I mean, one thing that I didn't mention is that Theodore and Minna, they were the last Jews in this village, and Elmshausen. And the mayor, because they were the last Jews, not only did the mayor keep like a meticulous file of everything, every document that related to them, but because they were the last Jews, any directive that the Gestapo would send to mayors of how to deal with, how to deal with the town's Jews was put into their file. So their file is in a way a complete set of Gestapo directives of how mayors should deal with Jews, including, and when you look in the file, the very precise regulations related to like wearing the yellow star. So that's just one example. So you may want to consider reaching out to, I don't know, is it Hamburg, the city, to see whether there are any files there locally or whether there is a state archive for Hamburg. I'm not sure which state that is. But both the state archive and the local archive, have been treasure troves.
Yeah, we've done that already.
Yep. Okay. Yeah.
We'd like to make a comment. It's Susan and Gary.
Oh, hi, Susan. Hey, Gary.
We are overwhelmed by you and your grandparents, Elsie and Robert, who we love dearly, and your mom, are smiling down at you and all the work you do. You are an example for the Jewish community. Thank you.
No, that's really sweet. Thank you so much. And by the way,
I know.
We're finding out, lots of stuff on the
Other side.
on the Lilienthal Poyas side.
Yes, I've heard. Thank you again.
Well, thanks for saying that.
Kathy
There's
wants
a hand.
the hand.
Hi, Ryan. I'm Kathy Zwaltis.
Hi, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Again.
Again, right. Ryan, I just like Joan and everyone else on here, I can't tell you how impressed I was, not only with your presentation in general and dividing it up into 3 understandable parts, but you were enthusiastic about and so excited every time you found another family member or some pieces of information. And I've been through that, so I know, like, every time I see a family member's name, I was like, oh my God, she really was in Stuttgart, referring to my mother. And I did really appreciate the search. And just for everyone who wrote some things on the chat, Ryan did mention the Bad Arolsen archives. It's Arolsen, and they have so much, and every day they throw more on, and I really do recommend that. Ryan, I also learned from you, being an immigration lawyer, never thought about looking at deportation orders for some of my relatives, so that's something else my daughter will have to help me with. Also, the young kids, ask your grandchildren. I'm telling you, my daughter called a Chabad rabbi in a small little town to help her find some documentation. I mean, I never would have thought about it. She just Googled, where can I find a Chabad rabbi who would know this? And they're usually, English speaking. So that's another thought. Ryan, thank you so much. Thank you.
And Kathy, thanks for sharing those suggestions. They're really, really good. Thanks.
Okay, I think we're sort of over our time, but it was well worth it. I'd like to thank you from the bottom of my heart. You did a great job.
Marcy, before we end the questions, Phyllis Shaw asked a question, Ryan, would it be possible to share links to the many resources you referenced in your presentation? And thank you so much for sharing this great story.
I haven't created a list of resources, but that's a good idea. I should create a list of resources. You are making me think. Maybe I'll just share my screen for another moment because it relates to that question. What I did do, I didn't quite make it to the end of the PowerPoint. There is, let me see if I can get there. I want to go. So what I did do, just in terms of organization, is create a Google Drive, and I'm just showing you the link, to do my own organization of material. For example, I wanted to take the documents and see what do these documents look like if it's a file just on Walter. And we'll see if this comes up. And so here you can see that I've shared a small fraction of the material that I have, including photographs. Thanks again to Simone and pictures we have on here. These are all documents that specifically relate to Walter as a way of reconstructing his life. And so you see a little bit of that. And so I think it's a good idea to have, an organization of where have I gone? And I'll stop the screen share. But it's something that, you may want to consider in terms of how do you organize your own archives. And I know that the Jewish Historical Society of Fairfield County is encouraging people to create their own archives. And what I would encourage you to do is put those archives into a drive that's on the cloud, or that's in the cloud, so you can share those files with whoever you want, relatives, whoever you want to show them, and then your relatives can load material on there too. And so you create your own archive.
Okay, I think that's a wrap.
Okay, Marcy, thanks so much. It was a lot of, a lot of fun is not the right phrase, but it's very meaningful to do this with you.
And to all, thank you.
Thanks,
All right.
Marcy.
Good night.
Good night, and thanks again, Roy. Take care.